Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates. You know, when you begin learning languages, something interesting happens. I think that each time you learn a language, you learn a little something about that language and also a little something about the process of learning a language. See, the biggest problem I had when I was learning Korean, I also tried to learn Korean. I was studying Chinese and living in China, and when you start learning a language, it's like a really
slow start. You're just learning one word and then how you use that word in a sentence, and then you learn another word.
It's just really intense when you start learning a language. But what happens after a year or 2 years is like now you move from like focusing deeply on one specific word, learning one specific principle, to more broadly just trying to get a lot of interaction, exposure to new words and new ideas, because you can kind of pick things up quicker as you improve in the language. And I remember that I went to South Korea for 3 months one summer, and it was like I was running so fast, and then I hit, you know, when you like step into mud and then the mud sucks your foot in. Yeah, so that was the first time when I noticed that, we're going to have a problem here. Many years later, I started learning Russian, and I think also I had this feeling like this is going to be a really hard language to learn. They have a different alphabet. All the pronunciation is different. The grammar is getting more and more complicated. And I just had this feeling like exposure. The whole concept was exposure. I didn't have any demand. I didn't have any requirements on myself to do any specific thing or learn any specific thing. I thought that if I just kept coming at it, that eventually I would learn the language. And it actually ended up not to be the case, because grammar is so complicated that you actually have to do very specific drills in order to learn those specific grammatical situations. I also moved to Saudi Arabia. I started to learn Arabic briefly, but then I couldn't learn another super heavy grammar language. So I gave up on that one. Now I'm learning French, and remember, I have to learn French because I want to get back to Canada. So it's like I'm stuck here in Georgia, all the way on the other side of the world, and I need to get back home. But I can't go home until I can speak French. But this time it's a little bit different, because you see, here we are. I'm creating YouTube videos and I'm sharing the process of how I'm actually learning the language, which forces me to break everything down into bite-sized pieces. And right now, we already started learning the pronouns like I and you and we and she and they in the subject position, so at the beginning of the sentence. And then we learned être, to be. And it was very simple, because the verb to be, you just use it to describe the subject. And then suddenly, how are you? How's it going? That was also pretty simple. Now we are moving to a slightly more difficult subject, which is the object of the sentence. So, like I was saying very early on, every sentence or most sentences in any language is going to be comprised of two things, and then there's a relationship between those two things, which is usually in the shape of a verb. We really want to understand the relationship. And when we understand the relationship, slowly we start to learn that there are direct relationships. So I see the book. I hear the music. I search for the game. The game? What game? I found the game. All right, so in this case, we're using a verb and a direct object. It's the exact thing. Like, what are you searching for? I'm searching for a game. What did you find? I found a game. What are you looking at? I'm looking at you. Then there's these other verbs that use like an indirect object. So for example, I asked a question. Okay, so the question is the direct object. But I asked my teacher a question. So now I'm actually sending my question in the direction of the teacher. The teacher is an indirect object. And in this case, when we start to use the pronouns, again, it's going to get more complicated. So a pronoun as a direct object or a pronoun as an indirect object are more complicated than perhaps I was expecting. But it seems like they are not as complicated as Russian. I think that when I studied Russian was that you can't just expect to learn the language without really focusing on grammar. Now that we're learning French, I'm really focusing on grammar. It's taking longer than I thought, but of course, this is like, give me the job, I'm going to do the job, I'm going to finish the job, we're going to put it aside, and we're going to get the next job. So like making YouTube videos, it forces me to make bite-sized pieces, something that you and me can understand. So if you check out my blog article from today, it's a little bit intense because the thing is, I didn't actually finish it. The picture, it's called Under Construction, and you see Marie with a construction hat on. And the blog article, I think I might change it over time. Also, the link, it's like it takes you to an exercise page where it has these 6 verbs. It has 4 direct verbs and 2 indirect verbs. And it has all of the pronouns in the object position. And it helps you to see how you would create these object pronouns in all of these different situations. And I think that before we start to try to explain all of the ins and outs of how complicated this really is, I would suggest just go to the exercise sheet, start to memorize it. And I'm going to change that exercise sheet over time. But if you go now, you can start learning those 6 verbs and you can start learning those pronouns in the object position. And I think that at least memorizing it is certainly half the battle when it comes to understanding this difficult grammatical point. And I think once we've memorized 6 verbs and how we put the object in an indirect and in a direct position, all this crazy grammar. So let's memorize, let's learn, let's under construction.